Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hawks Nest. Before we begin today, I just want to start by thanking everyone out there for the great comments and the positive feedback that we've received since we started this channel up about 6 weeks ago. I'm going to continue to keep pushing out as great a content as I can. Please do continue watching, and thank you for doing so. Now, with that said, let's dive on into the order of business of the day, shall we? I wanted today's episode to concentrate a little bit on this Seattle Seahawks offseason. The moves we made, the moves we haven't made, in order so we might be able to look a little bit further on what might still be on the table in free agency and also where we might be looking in the draft as far as player and position goes. And where I think this begins is with the guard situation. I think it's hilarious that in this modern day NFL, you have a fan base, or at least a general consensus among a fan base, that the number one priority on the team's list has to be retaining the starting two guards. How often does that occur? And not two starting guards that are two Pro Bowl guards. No. Not two guards that are in their early 20s just heading on into their prime, but two guards in their 30s with some injury concerns. Now, it's not to say I was against the move. Quite on the contrary. It's just funny. Mind-boggling.
Did you just say mind-boggling?
Yeah, mind-boggling. You know, when things are so crazy, it gets your thoughts all trapped like in a bottle.
So it was a little bit sad when right out the gate in free agency, we saw J.R. Sweezy head on to the division rival Arizona Cardinals on a 2-year deal. We were all quickly soothed at that point because Mike Iupati was signed a couple days later along with DJ Fluker on a team-friendly 2-year deal. And Mike Iupati also on a team-friendly 1-year deal. So really, we know what we're getting with DJ Fluker. What are we getting with Mike Iupati? Well, first out of the gate, I've loved this guy for years. I was actually one of those guys that you hoped going into a draft the Seahawks could somehow find a way to pick up because you knew he was such a certain thing on the next level. When you watched him in college and you watched the way he blocked, the tenacity, his ability to just basically pancake guys at will at times, you could just see on the film as you were going into the draft on this guy that he just smashed people and enjoyed doing it. He was going to move guys off the line. And that in this day and age is a very tough thing to find. So many of these offensive linemen anymore are pancaking and doing a lot of pass protection in college, so they're not going after it and really getting into guys. This is a guy who can do that. And it's continued on throughout the course of his career. He's had some injury concerns, but that's what we had with J.R. Sweezy as well. For as good as J.R. has been with us, he finished out the year last year on a broken foot, was probably less effective than he had been earlier in the year. And, of course, he went with the Bucs, had some back issues going on with them after he signed with them in free agency. So this Mike Iupati, I guess is what I'm saying, is actually an upgrade. When you look at this guy and you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, which I'll put over here on my shoulder, you can see that Mike Iupati, even though his injury-shortened season was less in the total games as far as what J.R. Sweezy played, they both had similar run-blocking games, but Mike Iupati is actually better in pass protection and actually a little bit better in run blocking. So in essence, what I'm saying is the Seattle Seahawks got an upgrade. Next on our list, we've got Jason Myers. This is a guy who last year was with us in training camp, but because Seattle had already given some money over to Sebastian Janikowski, there really wasn't as much of a competition going on. And they cut Jason Myers, who was having, by all accounts, a better training camp than Janikowski last year. Myers went on to the New York Jets, kicked 33 of 36 kicks in a stadium that is very windy and very hard to kick in. And now the Seattle seems to be kind of trying to undo their mistake a bit by bringing him back into the fold. There's not a lot not to like about this move. It's fine. It's good. I'm still in the camp that I'd like to see Seattle try to lock in on a kicker long term. And by that, I mean do something similar to what you did last season with Michael Dickinson. You went out and you put a 5th-round pick on him because you said this is the best punter in the draft. This is a guy who can kick for us for the next 10 to 15 years. Grab him. And that's what you've done. I think you've got to do the same with the kicking situation. We are a team that plays to run the ball. We're not going to be a super explosive offense from a point standpoint. So we've got to maximize possessions and we've got to pay attention to our special teams unit. That means not just bringing in a 40-year-old kicker who's going to blow his leg out when he tries to kick a game-winning kick in the playoffs because he's so damn old. No, we need to get somebody in here who's legitimate, who can handle the duties and handle it long term. Now we move on to the somewhat darkened cloud that hangs over, or should say looms over the Seattle Seahawks offseason and into next year. And that would be, did you hear that? I heard like horses. All jokes aside, this is the big issue that currently is probably plaguing the Seattle Seahawks front office. What do we do about the big four? Jarran Reed, Russell Wilson, Bobby Wagner, and Frank Clark. If you went out and did what John Snyder indicated on radio this week he was intending to do, which was to retain all four of them, you are going to have to pay them all top market price. And in doing so, and maybe I'm going on a limb on my own here, but I believe you're going to be crippling your salary cap. You're going to be talking about not only paying players into the upwards of $10 million a year, but on all of these guys, you're probably looking at pushing it $15 million a year, all the way up into Russell's case, darn near $35 to $40 million a year. And I think that it's because of this situation in its totality, it's also affecting the individual situations along with it. Russell's contract can't get done necessarily because they understand that if they do this contract, it almost immediately means one of these guys has to go. By sort of pushing this Russell situation out a little bit, I think the front office gets a little bit more time to sort of turn this over in their mind and try to find the right solution to the situation. I just don't see where that right solution or where that end is going to come to where you're able to sign these guys, all of them long term. And this is very important right now because this pushes forward to our draft situation. I'm going to start at the gate by saying I'm not in favor of trading Frank Clark. But when you look at all of these players and what's going on right now, when you look at the whispers being out there that the Seahawks are already in negotiations with Bobby Wagner, that they're trying to negotiate with Russell Wilson, and certainly they don't feel like they necessarily have to with Jarran Reed yet, but that you would imagine he's going to be kind of next on that palette, you then come to the understanding of what happens with Frank Clark. If you hold him onto the franchise tag this year and let him play through, you move on to next year with the high possibility that you do not get Russell Wilson signed to a long-term deal. When this happens, you cannot use the franchise tag on Frank Clark because you have to use it on Russell Wilson. When this happens, Frank Clark leaves. While he doesn't necessarily leave for nothing, you would probably get a third-round compensatory pick back from him. You're going to have to wait for a year for that compensatory pick, and then that's also with the conditions in place that you don't sign other free agents to offset that compensatory value, which we may be having to do at that point if we need to go get a pass rusher to replace Frank Clark. Where I'm going around the circle with this is that management could be looking at, and you have to think that they're looking really hard at, if we can't get a deal done with Russell Wilson, who just announced today that we better have a deal done by April 15th or I'm not negotiating through next year. So if they don't have a deal done by that point, how do they not look at that situation and say the only way for us to get some flexibility here is to trade Frank Clark and bring in somebody as far as in the draft, get that value back down so that we can move that money back over into Russell's pocket. I'm not saying it's where it's going to go in this situation, but I've turned the pieces and put the puzzle spots into this puzzle spot and twisted this pot and and it just doesn't seem to mesh. You're going to be upwards of $60, $70 million on four players. You're talking about a salary cap that's at $190 million. We don't know if it's going to continue to go up, especially with the new labor negotiations that are ongoing between the labor union and the owners. So this leaves us at this place where you have to think long and hard about the fact that if you make this trade, it does give you some flexibility. You can bring Russell back into the mold. You can bring Jarran Reed back on an extension, certainly get something done with Bobby. And this is a great draft for pass rushers, both inside and out. You could bring in the next guy to replace Frank Clark. Again, I'm not saying it's where I'd like to go. I'd prefer to keep all of these guys. But none of them have showed any indication of being willing to give a hometown discount. Quite the opposite. I think all of them seem to want to be maximizing the market to the utmost. And unfortunately, this is going to lead to at least one of them having to leave town. On the list of my next priority, the Seahawks re-signed KJ Wright and Kendricks. Overall, I like this deal. You're putting them on team-friendly deals that doesn't really have us putting a lot of money forward past year one on either of them. Both are solid players. These are great value moves where you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. With that said, we're now paying 4 linebackers substantial amount of money. And when you dovetail it back into the prior conversation where we need to rattle out every bit of loose change that we can to get the 4 guys of priority that we do want signed, or re-signed, I should say, it's a little problematic to me that you got these 4 guys all on the roster at the same time. Now, maybe we have some mixing and matching in a weird way that it all works out great, but I'm kind of going to be waiting to see it. As well, I think it's a little bit sad that we can take from this move that the Hawks do not feel like Shaquem Griffith is probably going to be starter material moving forward. Unless he makes some huge leap from year 1 to year 2, it would appear that the organization sees him as specifically just a backup player and a special teams demon, which isn't a bad thing to have, especially as I had spoken earlier on this podcast about my own favoritism towards wanting to have a super standout special teams unit when you're a team that runs the ball and plays defense, because you really are going to rely on that third facet more than maybe even other teams would. Well, that about does it for us today. We're going to try to keep these lean and mean so that you can maybe even devour this over a work break. We're going to be pushing out some videos here shortly in regards to the draft, looking at some prospects, some of the tape, seeing who might match up, especially with the recent combine numbers. As well, if you've got any suggestions regarding great Seahawk moments that you'd like to see me go over in a documentary style situation, please place them below in the comments. I'm turning over a few games right now that are potentials for the next video, but would love some feedback from the 12th man on what you guys think and want. I really appreciate you watching the Hawks Nest. Please continue to tune in, and if you like, hey, maybe, I don't know, subscribe.